Okay, I have the honor of introducing my friend. I am friends, guys, with the Hallee Bridgeman. Now, I've introduced her before, so if you've heard the introduction before, I didn't know about the Hallee Bridgeman. Like, Hallee writes real books. Like, real people read them, like, bestseller list on Amazon. Hallee Bridgeman. She also has imposter syndrome, so I don't want to set her up too hard here. But I didn't know who she was. I didn't know. And then I saw her name, I heard about her, I Googled her, and there's the Hallee Bridgeman, and I see her and I'm like, you're the and so then I started calling her THB. So if you want to call her THB, it's acceptable. It's an acceptable acronym around here. But I love having THB around, not only because she's a gem and a treasure, but because she challenges. And she doesn't, as a teacher, as someone who, it's hard for me to say this, has the spiritual gift of teaching, it's hard to stand up in front of a group of people and think, no one's going to check me. Yeah. And Hallee Bridgeman checks. She checks. So she's a treasure to me because she's a storyteller. And she sees the story of the Bible unfolding in ways that you and I maybe don't. And so when I get to nerd with her, it's awesome. So this is my treasure, my Hallee Bridgeman, MHB, and I will share her with you. I bequeath this time to you. And yeah, Hallee Bridgeman, y'all.
Where's our worship team? Okay, who did the music?
Lauren!
Where's Lauren? All right. I want to affirm you really quick. Two things. One, every single time I have talked to this group, a format of It Is Well With My Soul is the song before we sing. So who does not know the story of It Is Well With My Soul? Does anyone here not know? Okay, just a couple. So it's worth telling you. Horatio Spafford, is that right?
Yeah.
Was a very wealthy businessman in Chicago in the 19th century. And I wasn't prepared to talk about this, so forgive me, I'm really bad with names. He lost his son to a disease, and I want to say tuberculosis, but I could be wrong. And then he lost all of his money in the fire of Chicago in 18-something. And so his wife, now destitute, who used to be like a high society Chicagoan, goes home to England with their three daughters, and he's busy closing up all of his remaining business so that he can join them later. And on the journey from New York to London, the ship goes down, and he gets a telegram from his wife that said something to the effect of all is lost.
2 words.
Survive alone. I have the telegram. I have it.
Yeah.
I've talked about this before. I had it on a PowerPoint slide. And so he immediately leaves to join his wife in England. And at the spot where the ship goes down, where his remaining children die, he wrote, "It is well with my soul." So the next time you hear those words, think of the words. Where the sea billows roll, it is well with my soul. And so I have traveled the world teaching and speaking. One year I did 30 trips speaking, and I get so nervous talking to y'all. Last weekend I spoke to 400 people. And right now I'm like this ball of nerves because you're my people and I can't hide from you. Like I'm not going home and never seeing you again. We love you, Hallee! So then also the second thing is no longer slaves. So my husband's best friend is the same faith as us, and we were in Birmingham, Alabama for a community Passover, and there was like 450 people there, and they sang this song. There is nothing like No Longer Slaves being sung by 450 Jews in a community center. Were you there that weekend? So our youngest son can feed off everyone's energy. He can feed off of everything. I'll talk about him later in my talk. And he he's like standing on the table like this, singing that song because he's getting the energy of these people. So as soon as that song played, I'm like, okay, I'm good. I'm good. And then it is well with my soul, and I'm like, all right, God. I'm good. So, let me talk about, all right, the big one,
Yes,
right?
the big
All right. So, let me tell you a story. When I was pregnant with my son Scott, I was 29 weeks pregnant, and my husband was packing to go to jump master school because that's how the Army timing worked. And I started having contractions, and I ignored them. And I ignored them because my husband would not leave. 8 o'clock came, 9 o'clock came. By now my contractions are 2 minutes apart. And my husband would not leave. And finally I couldn't ignore it any longer. And finally I said, because all I needed was for him to go so that I could deal with this. Right? I didn't need him to not make the 7 a.m. formation the next day, right? So finally I admit that I'm having contractions 2 minutes apart. Of course he stops packing, and of course he drives me to the hospital. And the second that the triage nurse put the blood pressure cuff on my arm, the contractions went completely away, and they never came back. That wasn't why I was there. The reason I was there is because my blood pressure was 210 over 109. Ooh. And I had no symptoms of high blood pressure. I didn't have little squiggly lights. I call them warp speed. I didn't have those. I didn't have a headache. I wasn't discombobulated. I wasn't short of temper. I was simply about to have a stroke. And God started inducing contractions to make me pay attention to the fact that I was about to die.
Wow.
So they admitted me, and I was there for the next 9 days. So on the 10th day, well, they admitted me and my husband left. He got to formation at like 7:02. And my doctor, who was a DO, which is a little bit different from an MD. DO is like a whole body, whole health doctor, because we're a little bit crunchy. And y'all don't know me. Those of you who know me are like, yeah, of course she saw a DO instead of an OB. But he said that he was sure that there was something wrong with me, but he didn't know what it was. And he felt like I needed to be at the hospital the whole time, because he thought that whenever something happened that was going to tip one way or the other, I needed to be there when it happened. He said, I don't know if it's going to be you, I don't know if it's going to be the baby, I just have this feeling that you need to stay put. So on my 10th morning there, he came into my room. Or no, I had so every Monday they weighed you and did an ultrasound. So those of you who've been on hospital bed rest know what I'm talking about. And so I did the ultrasound, I went back to my room. I had a really, really, really bad weekend. They thought I was having a heart attack. I wasn't, but it was something. And so he came into my room and said, the insurance company is trying to make you go home, but another DO trusts my instinct, and he signed a second opinion, and so you're here, we're just gonna take it week by week. So, at this moment I'm 30 weeks pregnant, and a 40-week pregnancy is a normal pregnancy. So he left my room and said, I'm just gonna check your ultrasound, I'll see you tomorrow. About 10 minutes later, I can hear him running down the hall, like his footprints like slamming onto the tile floor as he's running. And he burst into my room and he said, how fast can your husband get here? So we won't talk about the 4.5 hours it took him to drive 350 miles. We're just not going to talk about that. So my friend and our pastor's wife, Mary, had been coming to the hospital every evening after work and just kind of hanging out with me. She'd have dinner with me, she'd hang with me, she'd leave. So somehow, in the time from the doctor leaving my room to go start the orders for the emergency C-section, and minutes, Mary showed up. I didn't call her, because I am not the type of person who looks at a crisis and suddenly says, I need a person here. I'm the type of person who looks at a crisis and says, what can I do, right? So I wasn't worried, I wasn't scared, but basically what happened was This thing that the doctor was waiting for to happen to either the baby or to me was happening to both of us. And he had mere minutes to get him out of me before both of us died, is basically what it boiled down to. He could not wait for my husband. I don't know how Mary got there. I don't know who called her. I don't know, maybe my husband called her husband. I don't know if a nurse called her. I have no idea. She just was suddenly there. So, basically, the long and short of it is that I was dying and the baby was dying. So, they needed to get me from the wing I was in, which was the perimenopause, whatever, the bed rest to the operating room wing. And as we go past the operating, as we're going down the corridor toward the operating room, and they're wheeling me down to like rip the baby out of me. And I know this because no one told me that, but when my second son's OB looked at my surgical reports, he explained to me like the terribleness of it all. I didn't know at the time. So anyway, we're going down the hall and we pass the waiting room, and I look, and now it's Monday morning. It's not Thursday evening. It's Monday morning. I had been there 10 days. So this is like old news to my people, right? By then Hallee's in the hospital. And I look, and there's like 24 people on their knees. And Mary's husband, Nathan, is in front of them. And they were holding a prayer vigil for me and my baby. So, assembling pleases God. Throughout the Bible, we read about God calling people together either to worship Him, to listen to Him, or to feast in celebration with Him. Isaiah 1:12 says, He will set up a banner for the nations and will assemble the outcasts of Israel and gather together the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. When we read about the court of God, He is always surrounded by the saints. Daniel describes God's seat on the throne like this. A fiery stream issued and came forth from before Him. 1,000 thousands ministered to Him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before Him. The court was seated and the books were opened. Daniel 7:10. 10,000 times 10,000 is 8 zeros. That's 100 million. So even if you were being literal with the numbers, that's a lot of million. In the book of Deuteronomy, God says that if Israel is disobedient, one of the things that He could possibly do to them would be to send in a plague of locusts. And so in the book of Joel, which we don't know a lot about, we don't know when it was written, we don't know what he's talking about, but in the beginning of the book of Joel, he talks about the calamity and the destruction caused by locusts. So because Joel is hold on, I'm backwards. Okay. So because Joel was a prophet, we can only assume that God sent the calamity to the nation of Israel because of their disobedience. So the first chapter of Joel is all about the destruction, and the second chapter is all about the day of the Lord, followed by a call to repentance. And in the call of repentance, in Joel 2:12 through 15, God says, Now therefore, says the Lord, turn to me with all your heart, with fasting and weeping and with mourning. So rend your heart and not your garments. Return to the Lord your God, for He is gracious and merciful, slow to anger, and of great kindness, and He relents from doing harm. Who knows if He will turn and relent and leave a blessing behind Him, a grain offering and a drink offering for the Lord your God. So at this point, everything is personal. Individual person, rend your heart and your garments. Individual person, give a grain offering and a drink offering to the Lord. And then Joel says, gather the people. Sanctify the congregation. Assemble the elders. Gather the children and nursing babies. Let the bridegroom go out from his chamber and the bride from her dressing room, which means bridegroom and bride come out from your individual places and join the congregation. Join the nation of Israel as you come together, and now you can be repentant for your disobedience. Let me go back now. So, in Genesis 2:18, God said, It is not good that man should be alone. I will make a helper comparable to him. So in Hebrew, there are two words that could have been used for not good. One is in tov, which means lacking. Like, these potatoes are lacking salt. Right? The other is lo tov, as in positively bad. As in, it is positively bad that man is alone. So I will make a helper suitable for him. That was me. That was my channeling of Alexis. Look, I did it again. So, in the Hebrew text of the Old Testament, there are 116 times the word kahel shows up. And in the New Testament, in the Greek, 150 times the word ekkalesio shows up. And those are the words for assemble. Those are not the words for gather, assembly, congregation, come together. Those are only the words for the word assemble. And if you can think of the fact that in 230 times, just for that one word to show up in the Bible, it kind of carries a little bit of a meaning in the fact that that is an important word to God, to assemble, to come together. Assembling draws us closer. We read about fasting throughout the Bible. Throughout man's history, God has called us to fast and to pray, and to pray and to fast. Christ himself went into the wilderness at the beginning of his ministry for 40 days and fasted and prayed. It is good and healthy and holy to fast. But there is also a time to break the fast. To continue to fast, it would cease to be good, it would cease to be healthy, and it would cease to be holy. It would become unhealthy, even bad, and eventually you would die. At the end of 40 days, Christ himself did not continue to fast. Angels came to him and ministered to him, feeding him food and water, restoring his strength so that he could go out and start his ministry. Aristotle once said, man is by nature a social animal. An individual who is unsocial naturally and not accidentally is either beneath our notice or more than human. Society is something that precedes the individual. Anyone who either cannot lead the common life or is so self-sufficient as to not need to, and therefore does not partake of society, is either a beast or a god. We are designed to be a community. I bet that a year ago I could have given this talk, and y'all wouldn't have even understood what I meant by the word need to be in community. But now, standing here, 51 weeks since the shutdown of Kentucky, since the closings of restaurants and Bible studies and churches and church services, since the limit of a year's worth of holiday gatherings and travel and family, and for some of us who have simply not done anything or gone anywhere as we waited for the solution to this pandemic to come, right now we all know what it means to need community. Much like fasting, there are times that isolation is required. I have a very isolating job. I sit in my little office in front of the computer screen, and without any human interaction, I write for hours on end. In fact, if there is human interaction, it pulls me out of the story that's in my head, and the story that I'm trying to convey on the screen, that I'm actually like present in the scene, witnessing. As soon as someone takes me out of that, it's not an instantaneous return. There's actually like a process involved. So I'll tell you that story. Yeah. My publishing company was putting together a compilation of books that I was not a part of. They were all surrounded by the same theme. So it was called Yesterday's Mail. And at the last second, just weeks before publication, an author pulled out. And so at 3 in the morning, my husband, who is the editor-in-chief of our publishing company, and the woman who this project was her brainchild, woke me to have a conference call with them. And So I'll add that I get up at 4 in the morning. So to get woken at 3 in the morning is really not very fair to me, because that's like an hour of the few hours of sleep I get a day. And basically they said, this book needs to be written in 2 weeks, and you're the only author we know who can pull it off. And pull it off well. And I do write very fast. And this book is not very long, you can tell. So, but the thing is that when I sit down to write in this reputation I have for writing really fast, by the time I do it, I already have my characters created. And this was something I had to not only create the characters, or not only write it into, because I had to create the characters. And so what I did was put it into a world I'd already built in the Jewel series. Use it as a second generation with a character I had already introduced. So I'd already created him, the man Chase. And then I created a woman who was an author, who would rather not interact with the world, who would rather just stay in her head all the time, who is terribly shy, really uncomfortable with small talk, full of social ineptness, and kind of a weirdo. So basically, I put me in a story. I'll give you a glimpse of what it's like to be in my head when I'm writing a book, all right? Or actually, when I'm getting interrupted. An icy wind blew right under Mandolin Clementine's skirt, making her shiver and wish she'd worn wool stockings. She held her hat on her head and ducked into the alley, finally getting some relief from the wind. She clutched her purse closer to her body as her boot heels clicked on the wet pavement. Nervously glancing over her shoulder, she walked further into the alley, moonlight providing the only light. She couldn't even see the edges of the light around the blackout curtains in the windows above her. She heard the noise again. It sounded like a strange buzzing sound. Hitler had used buzz bombs against London. Could New York City possibly have finally come under attack? 4 long years of foreign drills kept Mandolin on her toes and her ears perked up. No air raid sirens. The sound faded. She looked behind her again, but kept going forward. Finally, she saw the chalk outline of the murder victim. There you are, she said, stopping with her toes just on the edge of the chalk. A large blood stain ruined the symmetry of the outline. So your killer was right-handed. I guess that narrows it down a little bit. In her mind's eye, the chalk blurred, and a young sailor in dress blues lay before her, a stab wound on his left side. What were you doing in this alley, sailor? Some kind of rhubarb or chasing a dame? The buzzing sound behind her came back, much louder. She ignored it. Was your killer an anchor clanker too? What about you? Were you a swigger or did you snatch someone's cat? Suddenly, the buzzing sound overwhelmed her. Startled her, she looked up, her eyes wide with terror. It can't be, not now. The shrieking of the alarm pulled Violet Pearl out of 1944 New York City and planted her square back in modern-day College Station, Texas. Annoyed, she swiped at her phone to turn it off. 5:45 a.m. She didn't even have time to pretend to keep going. So that's what it's like. You pull me out of a story, you're pulling me out of 1944 New York City if I happen to be there at the time. Now this is how it takes to get into it, all right? So you have Violet, who is the author, and you have Mandolin, who is her character. Violet closed her eyes again, took a deep breath, and traveled in time, back from where she sat, back across the decades to this very city. Finally, her fingers stroked the keys, and these words appeared on her screen. Chapter 1. Violet breathed deeply through her nose as the cursor blinked patiently at the carriage return. Violet felt the chilly December day harden, and Mandolin felt the sting of ice in the wind of New York February when her doorbell rang. Mandolin answers her door. So, my job is very isolating. I need to be isolated. I need to be alone. I need to be able to transport myself. Right now, the book that I'm writing, I am in Istanbul with a special forces team undercover trying to track down an eco-terrorist who has blown up a pipeline in Alaska.
Get him.
Yes. And that is what I do. However, when the invitation came to go to a coffee at the Vibe with our small group looking for Lovely, I hesitated in going. We've hardly done anything social this year, but I realized how much this introvert, this isolated worker, needed that connection with my sisters in Christ. I needed to make eye contact and actually make eye contact and not just look at my camera and pretend that I was making eye contact. breaking that fast of isolation that my husband and my children completely respect. They'll let me go 12, 14 hours, not even talk to me. Filled this gaping hole inside of me that I didn't even know I was there. But in contrast, my 12-year-old son, Jonathan, Jeb, is an extrovert. And he loves having conversations with people, especially adults. And those of you who know him know him. He has a personality. He can sit down with you, find out what you're interested in, pull enough information from you to have an intelligent conversation with you about it, and then talk to you for hours. He feeds off of that. I have watched him do it since he was like 7 years old, and it's fascinating and it's scary. Because I feel like I'm being judged for being socially awkward if I say good morning as I walk past him. So right now, Jeb is hurting. His soul aches. He needs that mass community where he can pick out the adult that he's going to go talk to and pull information from and become an expert in your field. And I feel so bad for him that we've actually started him on like video conference counseling just so he has an adult to talk to. And I listened to him talk to her. They are not talking counseling, y'all. She's just letting him lead the conversation. And it's beautiful to give him that. Assembling together is something we need, despite any introvert-extrovert tendencies. We have been designed by a God who loves us to need interactions with people and to need them beyond just fulfilling a social obligation. Dr. Simon N. Young, a professor of behavioral neurochemistry, wrote in the Journal of Psychiatric and Neuroscience that humans are inherently social, and social behavior is important for our health and for our survival. Acts 2 describes the way the followers of Christ came together. Now all who believed were together, and had all things in common, and sold their possessions and goods, and divided them among them all, as anyone had need. So continuing daily with one accord in the temple, and breaking bread from house to house, they ate their food with gladness and simplicity of heart, praising God and having favor with all the people. And the Lord added to the church daily those who were being saved. They were together, even to meals, even to their possessions, even to their day-to-day lives. They came together and worshiped God. And my final point is that assembling gives us power. In Ecclesiastes, we read, 2 are better than 1, because they have a good reward for their labor. For if they fall, one will lift up his companion. But woe to him who is alone when he falls, for he has no one to help him up. Woe to him who is alone when he falls. Again, if 2 lie down together, they will keep warm, but how can one be warm alone? Though one may be overpowered by another, 2 can withstand him, and a threefold cord is quickly not broken. We know a very familiar proverb, as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. The concept of iron sharpening iron obviously implies at least 2 pieces of iron. It would be impossible for one tool to become sharper without the presence of another. Left alone, both blades would become dull and quite useless. The simple proverb illustrates one important biblical principle. God expects us to live and serve in a community of other believers, and he desires for us to draw on the power that comes from building loving and growing relationships with others. That power that allows us to sharpen each other, to pray for, encourage each other, keeps us steadfast. Romans 12:4-8, you know this one well from last year, ladies. For as we have many members in one body, but all the members do not have the same function, so we, being many, are one body in Christ, and individually members of one another. Having then gifts differing according to the grace that is given to us, let us use them. If prophecy, let us prophesy in proportion to our faith. Or ministry, let us use it in our ministry. He who teaches is in teaching. He who exhorts in exhortation. He who gives with liberality. He who leads with diligence. He who shows mercy with cheerfulness. We come together as one body with different gifts, ready to serve God without lacking anywhere. Let's say that Alexis is gifted in teaching, but not leading. because she's the person directing someone to the leader. Who then will lead those who teach? Who will prophesy, giving Alexis fodder for teaching? Who will show mercy to those who are needing God's love and kindness? Who will push aside us introverts to step forward and welcome newcomers with cheerful countenance and exhortation? Together, we are one powerful singular body that is weak and incomplete when we are alone. My son Scott was born 10 weeks early at 3 pounds and 5 ounces. I was super sick. From the operating room, they wheeled me to the intensive care unit, and stopping for about 10 seconds, let me touch him. And then we were separated for 3 days. I was in the ICU. I didn't die. But the nurse did come in one time and say, Mrs. Bridgeman, if you don't calm down, you're going to die. You have to calm down. Because I wanted to see my baby. The doctors told us that Scott would be there until his due date, that he had to be 5 pounds before he could go home, that white boys thrived less in the NICU than any other baby. In fact, in the South, any of y'all who have had a white baby in the NICU in the South have probably heard the term wimpy white boy. They typically don't thrive the same as other babies. They're usually worse off with more issues and have a higher mortality rate. Oops. I am here to tell you that I believe without a doubt, in my mind, that my son Scott, the one the nurses called the wimpy white boy, came home 6 whole weeks before his due date at 4 pounds and 6 ounces. And the reason he did that was because a community of believers were on their knees. They listened to the call to come together. And they didn't hesitate on a Monday morning when I had already been there for 10 days. And they had been ministering to me for those 10 days. They came and they got on their knees and they prayed him into this world. For where 2 are gathered together in my name, I am there in the midst of them. When 2 are gathered, do I believe that their prayers would have had less of an impact if they had been in their individual homes? I do. I believe God would have heard their prayers, but I believe that He rewarded their obedience. My wimpy white boy is 6 feet tall. And he's not done growing. He is thriving and healthy and brilliant in a way that most of us cannot even comprehend. Our verse this year. Let us consider one another in order to stir up love and good works, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together as in the manner of some, but exhorting one another, and so much the more as you see the day approaching. As with every single thing that God tells us to do, there is a reason. He did not give us these words as an edict without purpose just to see what we would do. He gave us these words because assembling pleases Him. Assembling brings us closer, and assembling gives us power. Amen.